네, 안녕하세요. 저는 앤드류 박입니다. 우선 제가 한국말이 좀 서툴합니다. 그래서 우리 번역가가 너무 잘하시기 때문에요. 제가 이 프레젠테이션을 영어로 하는 게 여러분들한테 조금 더 편안하실 것 같아서요. 제가 앞으로 이제 영어로, 죄송하지만 영어로 하겠습니다. 혹시 질문 있으시면 얼마든지 저 한국말로 알려주십시오. First of all, I want to let everyone know that the presentation I'm doing, which is Introduction to U.S. Government Contracts, is a presentation that our law firm's chairman, Jeff Hady, had planned to do today. We unfortunately learned that he had a family emergency, and so he was not able to attend today. He asked us to please apologize to Kita and to the audience for his absence, and I was asked to do the presentation in his place. So I will do my best to do this presentation. Before I begin the presentation, I'm just curious about our audience today, and I wanted to just ask a few questions, if I may. I guess one question that I had is, how many companies here today are currently doing business already in the United States? If you could let us know by raising your hand, I would appreciate that. How many companies are currently doing business in the U.S. now? Okay, so it's a relatively small number. Two other questions. I'm curious also to know the breakdown between the companies here who are actually providing goods and companies who are providing services. If your company is selling goods, please raise your hand. So maybe one half. So I can assume that the other half may be providing services. My final question is, can you tell me basically what sort of industry your company is involved in? For example, is your company involved in the construction industry? Whether you provide some kind of engineering services or you manufacture construction equipment. If you are in the construction industry, please raise your hand. Do we have anyone? Okay, one. Two. How about defense-related industry? Does your company provide any services to the Korean military, the U.S. military, or any other type of military defense-related industry? Do we have anyone here? No. Final question. How about in IT? Do we have any companies in the IT industry, either service or goods? One. Okay. Thank you very much. As you probably know, I'm a lawyer, and I've been practicing for about 22 years now. And I have to say that I'm really excited and optimistic about Korean companies' opportunities to do business in the United States, especially with the U.S. government. And when I talk about the U.S. government, I'm talking about the federal level of the government and also the state and local levels. And there are three reasons why I'm so optimistic. The first is that, and everyone knows this, but Korean companies are providing world-class goods and services. I really believe that. And number two, I think that Korean companies, it's inevitable that Korean companies will be looking overseas to expand their markets. And I'm going to show you a slide in a minute which shows that the opportunities to sell goods and services to the U.S. government are huge. And so the final factor, the final reason I'm so optimistic is that we have international agreements like Chorus, which really have created new opportunities. And so I think the combination of those three factors make this a really good time for Korean companies to at least consider doing business in the U.S. with the U.S. government. And by the way, I'm not a salesman for the United States government. I'm a lawyer, so these are just my observations as a lawyer. Okay, I'm going to go to the first slide here. This first slide, as you can see, as I mentioned before, provides significant opportunities for expanding your market. And as you can see here in the first bullet point, last year the U.S. government purchased $533 billion in various types of goods and services. One of our clients, Lockheed Martin, happens to be the single largest government contractor, and they provided goods and services totaling $43 billion. And you'll see in the bullet right below, I asked the question about defense and how many companies are involved in the defense industry. It so happens that the Department of Defense accounts for 70% of the government contracts that are available. So the Department of Defense is a huge area for Korean companies if they are doing defense-related goods and services. The other bullet point here is that in terms of the top contracting categories, we note that professional services are at the very top, and then they are followed by research and development, construction, aerospace, and technology. So these are the reasons why I asked about your company's industry. This is a slide of a copy of the GSA schedule. And I will discuss the GSA schedule in more detail later. But as many of you probably know, the U.S. federal government has a very good website that lists all of the various standard goods and services that they are looking for. And this is just a copy of one of the pages on the website. But in other sections of this website, it will list the different types of goods and services that they need. It will list the date by which you must submit your proposal, and it will contain other detailed information. This is an example of the equivalent of the GSA schedule, but it is produced by the state of New York. So you have the federal GSA schedule, and then you have each state which may provide their own schedule of goods and services. And as I said before, this one is from the state of New York. This slide indicates some of the Korean entities that are contractors to the United States government. And as you can see, they include universities, they include SMEs, and of course, they include chaebols. This slide has a lot of information here, so you can read this later, but I can summarize it very briefly for you. The main point of this slide is that as I said before, the sales to the U.S. government can be very profitable, and they can create many opportunities. But these opportunities have a cost, and they have certain risks. So while there is a tremendous upside, there is also a lot of work that companies need to do in order to prepare for access to government contracts. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Government contracting is much, much different from commercial contracts. So if you have company A and company B and they have a contract, that is considered a commercial contract. It's very straightforward. But contracts between company A and the U.S. government or a state government are very heavily regulated by different laws and statutes. And so it becomes very complex, and oftentimes the government regulations are very inflexible. And so many times you have to do it a certain way, and if you don't do it that way, then your chances of getting an award are reduced. The other point here is that in order to successfully get a government contract, it often requires a great deal of relationships. And I know that in our country, in Korea, relationships are very important, and they are also very important in this particular area. Our firm has been doing this, government contracts, for over 50 years. We have, over those many decades, developed relationships and continued those relationships at the federal level and at the state level. And so this is the reason why many companies come to our firm for our assistance. This slide is intended to show some of the different things that I will be covering in this presentation. I will talk about some basics and then the different types of contract formation, the different types of contracts, some of the compliance issues, etc. I'll include a discussion on the Buy American Act, which I believe many of you have heard before and are familiar with. Basically, this slide discusses some of the basic concepts concerning U.S. government contracting. I know this sounds somewhat obvious, but the U.S. government can only spend money which it is authorized by law. So again, this is when doing work with the government, it's very inflexible. Secondly, the U.S. Government contracts, as I mentioned before, are not commercial contracts, so there are various regulations that are applicable. And in addition, in a contract with a government agency, if there is some type of breach, they can be subject to criminal penalties. So in a straightforward commercial contract, if there is some kind of breach, then maybe company A can sue company B, maybe company A can get some money from company B, but in a contract with the government, it may be possible for an individual to actually go to jail. It sounds a little bit frightening. It's not something that I think our audience needs to be concerned about, but I just wanted to bring that up as a distinction between commercial contracts and contracts with the government. So let me just flip to the next slide. This slide discusses some of the major federal regulations and laws that apply to government contracts. And I will not bore you with a detailed discussion about this, but I would like to mention this very first, bullet point. The Federal Acquisition Regulation, which is also known as FAR, F-A-R, is considered the key statute. It's the main government statute for government contracts. And as you can see, there are a number of others here. One other thing that I would like to bring to your attention is that when a company discusses a prospective contract, the company will be dealing typically with an individual known as a contracting officer, right here. And this person is someone that will be very important to the success of your efforts to get a government contract. And it's these sorts of people at different agencies with whom relationship building can be very, very helpful. And as I mentioned before, these are the types of relationships that our firm has built over the years. This next slide talks about some basic responsibilities of a company who is thinking about doing business with a U.S. government. And one of the first things that is recommended for a company that is planning to do business is to obtain what's called a data universal numbering system. It's also known as DUNS. And this, for those companies who are not familiar with this number, it's actually a registration process that you can do online at dnb.com. And it is a number that is required by all companies who want to bid for a particular project. The other thing that companies should start thinking about very early on is to make sure that they have a process, internal process, for things like financial accounting, things like labor issues, things like ensuring that you have a good policy for integrity and business ethics, because these are things that you cannot create overnight. It requires time, and at times it requires consideration, but they are all basic elements for companies that want to do business with a U.S. government entity. The next slide goes through a typical contract process, and of course, we began a contract formation by beginning with negotiations. And as you can see here, once a U.S. government agency issues a request for proposal, then a interested contractor will analyze the requirements, and then they will submit their submissions to the government agency. By the way, in case people are not familiar with RFP, RFP is request for proposal, and that is basically when a government agency is soliciting for bids on particular goods or services. So once that comes out, interested contractors can review it and then submit their proposal. As it says here, the U.S. government will then engage in discussions with the contractors regarding the requirements and the proposed submission, and then the U.S. government will request contractors to submit their best and final offer, BAFO. And following the selection process, the government evaluates the proposals, and as everyone might expect, the most important element when the government reviews the proposal is it the lowest bid? But I have to also stress that in addition to the lowest bid, probably the second most important thing is the government getting a best value? So sometimes the lowest bid may not be the winning bid, sometimes they will factor in other considerations and determine whether a particular bid is the best value. This next slide talks about the different types of contracts. And as you can see here, there are basically two different types of contracts. The first is fixed price contract, which is a firm price or at least a target price for a particular project. And the second type is a cost type contract, and this includes cost plus a fixed fee or cost plus some sort of incentive fee. This next slide talks about compliance-related issues. And basically, there are certain things that prospective contractors need to comply with. One here is the standards of conduct. This is somewhat important because it is basically going to conflicts of interest. And I think one of the best ways to describe conflicts of interest is to give you an example. If, for example, the government hires company A to help them draft an RFP, and later on that company responds to the RFP in an effort to get the job, then that is a breach of this conflict of interest. They cannot do that because they were already involved in this particular project. They already had a relationship with the government, and therefore they cannot later try to bid for the project. This next concept, improper influence, I think is very straightforward. No bribes, no improper gifts or gratuities. As far as improper gifts are concerned, my next slide will talk about what that means. But as you will see, gifts are they can be somewhat not worthwhile, because the gifts that are acceptable are very small. And if you give a gift, it can later on become an issue. So many people recommend that companies simply not give gifts. At the bottom of this slide, it talks about what is a gift. And they include, for example, tickets to sporting events, golf outings, meals, even transportation, lodging. Just many, many things are considered gifts. At the top of this slide, it talks about the exceptions. In other words, gifts that are permissible. So sometimes gifts are okay. The problem is the gift is very small. Gifts of $20 or less are acceptable. And gifts based on a personal relationship and these other types of limited things are acceptable. Another concept of contract compliance is what's called socioeconomic programs. What this means is that the government encourages companies to be active in things that help the economy or things that help society. So if a company hires people with some kind of mental disability, or if they hire people with some kind of physical handicap, then that is considered a benefit to society. And therefore, those sorts of companies will have an advantage when bidding for projects. Also, small businesses tend to have that sort of advantage. And companies here who have some kind of focus on occupational safety or drug-free workplace. These are all things that the government considers a positive influence on society and things that can help in the bidding process. And I mentioned this earlier, but companies that have good labor laws are also seen as an advantage. So I'm not sure how much this is important to Korean companies, but in the United States, companies that hire minorities, companies that hire African American people, that hire Hispanic people, they are considered minorities in the U.S. And if they have that kind of labor policy, that can also be helpful. This is also just a continuation of compliance issues. I mentioned in the very first slide that the Department of Defense accounts for 70% of all government contracting. It's a huge percentage. At the same time, any company that wants to do business with the Department of Defense should probably expect a much more rigorous process. And this is an example of some of the things that are required when doing business with the Department of Defense. The first is they will expect a company to have a very strong accounting and billing process, internal billing process. They will have expectations on estimating, on purchasing, and all of these other internal systems. And so, yes, the Department of Defense has large opportunities, but it's also going to be an extra effort to get projects with the Department of Defense. The False Claims Act is also something that's applicable when you are seeking an opportunity with the Department of Defense. And basically, what this says is that anyone who knowingly presents or causes to be presented a material false or fraudulent claim for payment will be in breach of this FCA. And this FCA is actually a statute that is we see often. Many companies who don't have very good internal practices and policies will have problems with the FCPA. And one of the reasons why companies are especially concerned about the FCA is that it encourages people to identify companies that break the law. And that's what they call whistleblower. As you probably know, in this case, if a person reports a company to the government because of some problem with the FCA, then that person will be rewarded. So as it says here, they are entitled to receive a share of any subsequent settlement or judgment. So this is one of the reasons why many companies give a lot of attention to the FCA. This next slide talks about technical data and software. If your company is providing some sort of technical data or software to the government, extra care and attention should be given to this, because many times the government will try to obtain ownership rights to these sorts of things, which are quite valuable. So, quite frankly, in some cases, if you want to do business with the government, it may be necessary for you to relinquish your rights. But in other cases, there may be opportunities to negotiate with the government, and these are the sorts of things that we do on a regular basis. The key issue is that you do not want to give rights to the government without any kind of knowledge. If you do give rights, at least you want to know that you're doing that. The other area that is of particular importance are termination of contracts. Once you have a contract with the government, unlike commercial contracts, the government may decide to terminate that contract at its convenience. And this is something that you really do not see in a commercial contract. Someone asked me recently about the situation in Washington concerning the fiscal cliff. I don't know if you have seen this in the news lately, but in Washington, D.C., there is a big battle between President Obama and Congress concerning the U.S. budget. And basically, if the two sides cannot agree on a budget by a date sometime this month, I believe it's the end of this month, then there will be automatic tax increases on U.S. citizens. And the reason why I mention this is that if the two sides cannot find a resolution by this month, then there will be major problems, major concerns in the United States about the economy. And it could cause President Obama to say, I don't want to honor this contract anymore because right now the federal government has many problems. So that is an example of a situation where the U.S. government may decide to terminate a contract at its convenience. If that type of termination happens, then of course there are opportunities for the contractor to get reimbursed for certain expenses, but they will not be entitled to recover lost profits. This next slide just talks about some general contract performance matters. I think here the key is that there are situations where once a contract is signed, it is possible for a contractor to go back to the government and ask for certain additional compensation, and that's really the takeaway from this slide. They call it extra funds for either additional work performed or for other types of similar reasons. This next slide concerns a U.S. act. It's called the Buy American Act. And I think you'll be interested in knowing about this act. It basically requires U.S. federal agencies, so it does not affect the state level or local level, just the federal level. It requires federal agencies to purchase products from U.S. sources unless there is an exemption. And as you can see in the second bullet, there are some exemptions, but they are not that many. The first exemption is if the U.S. product is considerably more expensive than an identical foreign product, then the BAA does not apply. Or if the U.S. product is not available in sufficient quality or quantity, then the BAA does not apply. Or if it is otherwise in the interests of the U.S. government, then the BAA does not apply. And finally, if a waiver is granted, then the BAA does not apply. So the interesting thing about the BAA is that before chorus, the BAA applied to any purchase of goods or services of under $200,000. So if the government wanted to if your company provided services for $180,000, then the BAA would apply. And in order to do business, you would have to fall into one of these exemptions. However, with Chorus, the amount has dropped from $200,000 to $100,000. Okay, so if your company is providing goods or services for $120,000, then the BAA does not apply. Another aspect of the Buy American Act is that, and this only applies to Department of Defense contracts, it requires contractors to certify the amount of foreign content in any procurement covered by the BAA. So, for example, if you have a refrigerator and some parts of the refrigerator are made in Taiwan and the rest are made in Korea, you need to certify the amount of foreign content. And as with many things with the Department of Defense, there are strict penalties for false certification. This, again, is talking about the Department of Defense contracts. There are many export control regulations that are of great concern. So if you're providing defense-related products or services, there are various regulations. One of the key regulations is the International Traffic in Arms Regulation, also known as ITAR. And it regulates the transfer of military items and data. There are, as you can see, others called EAR, there's ECCN, and there's OFAC. So if your company is involved in this type of industry, defense-related goods and services, you should contact a lawyer, or you should get some professional advice in order to ensure that you are in compliance with these regulations. By the way, the last one here, the OFAC, imposes sanctions on numerous countries. Regulations, it says regulations imposed by the OFAC imposes sanctions on numerous countries. So it is not permissible to do business with certain countries like Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Sudan, and Syria. This slide is also really focusing on defense, and since we don't have too many people involved in this area, I'm going to go over it very quickly, but there are national security interests involved, and so there are various things that need to be disclosed, and there are various entities in order to have access to classified material. They need to be U.S. citizens, and it also requires that companies actually be a U.S. entity. I think I talked about most of this. And this, again, is another requirement. They require you to have what's called a government security committee. And again, this focuses on defense-related contracts. This also focuses on defense-related issues. But this one called Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S., also known as CFIUS, is a very prominent committee, and basically they review various types of transactions to make sure there's no national security issue. I'll give you one quick example. Recently, a Middle East company attempted to acquire a very important port in the United States. And ultimately, the U.S. government prevented the deal from going through because of national security issues. And our firm represented some parties that were involved in that potential transaction. So that's a situation where the U.S. government said no, the Middle East company may not acquire this U.S. port. So the title of this slide is What to Do Before Your First U.S. Government Contract. Assuming that you are new and you've never done a U.S. government contract, these are the kind of steps or things that you should be considering. Obviously, the company needs to understand the type of contract and its requirements. The GSA that I mentioned before is a schedule of standard contracts. And you need to know whether or not FAR is going to be relevant, or whether there's going to be some other federal statute or regulation that will be relevant. And you need to know whether you have some aspects which will be beneficial to your application or your proposal, such as, are you a small business? Or is this, it's possible to do business with the U.S. government, but you will actually have a standard commercial contract and not a contract with a government agency. Usually these types of commercial item contracts are for standard types of goods. For example, pens or pencils or something like that. Those sorts of simple agreements are commercial contracts. Then the other thing is the Code of Business Ethics. I talked about that before. This is not something that you can create in one day or even 1 week or maybe 1 month. It requires a lot of pre-planning. So when your company is considering on doing business with the U.S. government, you should have this kind of Code of Business Ethics. You should have a training policy for your employees. And there should be an internal review policy in place, because all of these factors are going to be considered by the government when they consider your bid. This is, again, something that I covered before, but other things that the government will consider are your labor and employment practices and policies, procedures, your accounting policies, your books and records. How well are you retaining your books and records? How well are you keeping them up to date? And do you have a retention policy? Do you have a policy for keeping your books and records, your old records? We also talked about gifts, and we talked about quality control. So these are some other things that you should be thinking of now if you're planning on submitting a bid, and have these things in place before you submit your bid. This slide and the next several slides concern a case study. It is a hypothetical situation that our law firm created, but we think it's a good example of what a company would typically do when they submit a bid for a contract. The company name is Blue Star, and it's a foreign-owned company, and they have 1,200 employees. So that tells you automatically that this is not a small business. And by the way, a small business is a business that does $20 million of business annually or less, and they have less than 200 employees. So they have 1,200 employees, so it's not a small business. And it says Blue Star designs and manufactures protective covers for cameras, smartphones, and other electronic devices. They developed a military-grade carbon composite cover to fit devices for the military. So it sounds like they might have some application for the Department of Defense, defense-related. Blue Star noticed that the U.S. government purchases similar covers for various military products. So Blue Star is seeking to sell their product to the U.S. government. Those are the facts. So step one, Blue Star, what does Blue Star need to do? Step one, Blue Star reviews the available federal program to determine if it qualifies as a small business or other type of program. We already said that they have too many employees, so they do not qualify as a small business. Step two, Blue Star signs up for a DUNS number and registers with the Central Contractor Registration Database. That's the DUNS database that I mentioned before. Also, Blue Star enters into its business representation and certifications with the U.S. government's online certification and representation application. Step three, Blue Star employees attend extensive training on U.S. government contracts in order to learn the basics. Further, Blue Star conducts a review and updates its own policies. So as you can see in step three, they are making sure that they have all of the internal policies and practices in place. Step four, the GSA schedule. Blue Star determines that its military-grade covers are not on the GSA schedule. As I mentioned before, the GSA schedule only covers standard items. However, they do determine that their military-grade cover may be for other types of covers, like camera covers, which are on the GSA schedule. So Blue Star determines that they will pursue this opportunity at a later date. Step five, Blue Star needs to raise their profile. Prior to obtaining any specific government contract, Blue Star raises its profile with relevant U.S. government agencies by demonstrating its product at trade shows and networking. So, as I mentioned before, relationships and having an opportunity for the company to learn about the relevant government agency and having the government agency learn about you, the company, are very, very important. So that's step five. And step six, Blue Star researches the market to determine where the U.S. government is spending money with respect to products that are related to its product. Step seven, Blue Star conducts research regarding potential opportunities. It also reviews the federal supply schedule for potential GSA opportunities in the future, down the road. And as a result, Blue Star identifies a potential opportunity. So basically what has happened here is Blue Star has a military-grade cover. They realize that this cover is not going to meet the requirements for the cover that it found on the GSA schedule. But they do see something in the future that they might be able to pursue. So they didn't stop once they realized we cannot pursue this particular project. They continued and they found some sort of opportunity that they might be able to do in the future. Anyway, step eight, Blue Star dedicates a team of people to analyze, to review and analyze the requirements and prepare its bid. The requirements for bid submission are complicated, and the government takes them seriously. So Blue Star is sure to follow all requirements. So as I said before, there are very strict requirements, and they are very rigid, so it's very important that Blue Star follow them very carefully. Step 9, Blue Star is awarded its contract. Before Blue Star is awarded its contract, Blue Star analyzes the requirements of the contract on which it bids and implements the necessary business systems. The business systems are the internal systems that we talked about: accounting, billing, labor law, labor issues, things of that nature. Step 10 is subcontracting. So Blue Star continues to raise their profile with the government. In other words, they continue to meet government officials. They continue to find opportunities to learn about the government agencies that are relevant to them. And they hope that the government will learn about them as well. So ultimately, Blue Star is not awarded the contract on which it bid, but it is awarded a subcontract under a prime contract with the U.S. government for a similar product. This allows Blue Star to continue to implement its compliance program and prepare for future bidding opportunities. This is just a slide of 5 companies who are not U.S. companies, but who do a large number of government contracting with the U.S. government. In this slide, we move away from federal opportunities and we talk about state and local opportunities. The real challenge here, and I think we'll talk about it, is that with the federal opportunities, you go to the GSA schedule website and you can find all of the federal opportunities in one location. But with the state opportunities, each state has their own. And so it's much more challenging to find state opportunities. But it can be done. And here we say that opportunities include governmental authorities and administrative entities. So, for example, we looked at the New York schedule of opportunities. It's possible to get a contract with the state of New York, or it's possible to get a contract with the city of Albany, or the city of New York, or any other city. And it's also possible to get a contract with some other type of entity. If you have been to New York City, you may know that the subway system and the bus system and the train system are all operated by an entity called Port Authority. And that also is another type of entity where contracts may be awarded. And so, here it says there is no uniform process. The processes can differ from state to state. And identifying the opportunities can be challenging. But in our case, for example, we have 10 or 11 offices throughout the United States. We also have an office in Europe. But we have offices in major cities in the U.S., and we've developed relationships at appropriate levels at the state and local levels. And so, these are things that we do regularly, assist our clients in finding opportunities. As I talked about before, relationships are important. And the process of decision to purchase may be more unpredictable. So this is kind of a summary. Clearly, there are many, many opportunities to provide many, many different types of goods and services to the federal government, state and local governments. But there are also many challenges to being successful. Just the number of U.S. laws and regulations make it very complex. And so, although there are these types of initial costs and initial hurdles, it can be very worthwhile because once you do this a couple of times, it becomes a lot more easier. And obviously, the intention is not to just do one government contract, but to repeat the business. this is just a little bit of a description about our firm. Our firm actually founded the first government contracts practice in the United States. And that was about 50 years ago. And right now, our government contracts practice is the largest and most successful in the United States. Here we talk about some of the reviews from various types of organizations in the legal community about our government contracts practice. We are a Tier 1 law firm in government contracts, which means we are at the highest level for government contract services. And I won't bore you with the details, but we've obviously been doing this for a long time. I hope that we'll have another opportunity to meet with you again, and the next time I'm sure that our chairman and perhaps other members of our firm who are involved in government contracting will be able to join us. We'd be more than happy to discuss with you any types of issues that you might have, or that any questions you might have. I didn't introduce myself. I apologize. Our law firm is in the process of opening an office in Korea, thanks to Chorus. And our office is located right near Yaksamyeok, across from GS Tower. And I am the representative from our firm. So I live here in Korea and I work here. So if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me or my colleagues Hong Jung or Alan Wolf. These are some other details, but that's the end. Thank you very much.